My name is Juliana Nicolasian with the Oklahoma State University Library. Today is Monday, December 20th, 2010, and I'm in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, interviewing Major General Rita Aragon. This interview is being conducted as part of the Oklahoma Women's Hall of Fame Oral History Project. Rita was inducted into the Oklahoma Women's Hall of Fame in 2009. Thank you for joining us today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much.
Well, let us begin by learning a little bit more about you. Could you tell us a little bit about where you grew up and give us a little background into your early life?
Certainly. I was born in Shawnee, Oklahoma, but I was raised in Dale, a little rural community about 25 miles east of Oklahoma City, just off of Interstate 40. I was raised in my parents built their home by hand, quite literally. My grandfather was a construction guy, and my dad worked at Tinker Air Force Base. We moved there when I was 5 years old. We didn't have indoor plumbing until I was 12, and we never had a telephone in my home until I went away to college. It was very important to my parents that they got married at 17, both of them extremely bright and talented, articulate, well-read, but not able financially to go to college. So from the time my sister and I were born, there was talk about us being ready and prepared to go to college. It was important that they felt like that was the key to success, and both would have loved to attend college. My dad would have loved to have been a doctor, and my mother wanted to be a nurse, but that just wasn't in the cards. So instead, they both really have had a complete life of service to the community and the family where we live at Dale. I went to Dale School. We didn't have kindergarten, so I started in first grade and went through 12th. With virtually the same class of kids I started the first grade with, I graduated. 30 whole students in that class. My thrust in life really wasn't academic. It was to play basketball. Dale is a big girls' basketball site, and being rather short of stature, I had to do a lot of things that made me a little more competitive. Because we were very poor, back in those days they didn't have a lot of the stuff you could go down to Academy or to the local sports store and buy. So my mother took an old pair of Converse tennis shoes, sewed some fabric on the outside of it, and my dad melted lead and poured into it to make lead weights so that I could run in the summer, and I would run and run and run. So it was important that from the very beginning that I learned to take what strengths I had and accentuate those. Since I didn't have height, speed was supposed to be the thing I worked on, and I did, and I would run all summer and into the fall to be prepared for basketball season. Therefore, I got to play on the high school basketball team, which was a big deal from my freshman year on. Enjoyed it and loved it, and I really believe that was the basis of looking at what I later talk about leadership and how important it is on a team to find your particular role. That's probably way more than you wanted to know. That's my early childhood. I have one sister who's a year younger than I am, much higher IQ and much smarter than me, but she only stayed in college a year and then went to work at Tinker Air Force Base in computer programming, and she is a phenomenal computer programmer.
Well, when you were going to school, did you have a favorite subject, something you gravitated towards?
Well, basketball was the overriding point, but to be truthful, I really enjoyed 4-H and FHA, and then I actually was the FFA sweetheart, which is a strange phenomenon in itself. No, I really didn't enjoy one subject over the other. In fact, it's really kind of strange because I was third in my class out of 30. That's not a really big deal. But really, the only homework I ever had to take home was accounting. And math was not my strong suit, so I had to really work at that one. But to be truthful, I enjoyed science. I really enjoyed English and literature. I was fascinated because I love to read. Spent a lot of time wanting to learn to write myself and being able to express myself. But in high school, no, the overriding and overarching emphasis was on all those special activities, basketball, volleyball, 4-H, FHA, and really in 4-H was when I really began doing my speaking and doing public speaking, learning to do that, and then I picked that up in college and really enjoyed. I don't enjoy debate, but I do like extemporaneous speaking, and I like all of the different types of speech that I was into, and I enjoyed those things.
Well, as you're going through school and you're thinking about life, did you have any idea of what you wanted to be when you got older?
Actually, I really didn't. Back in those days, when you were a girl, if you were going to go to college, you were either going to be a nurse or a teacher. I didn't feel like I had a strong enough science background and didn't like blood, so teaching seemed to be the natural navigation. To be truthful, I really wanted to. My first year at college, I was really going into looking at being a legal secretary or legal stenographer. Thinking of being an attorney was way beyond my thoughts. I mean, I didn't even dream about doing that, but I thought I wanted to be a legal secretary. Then I found out back in those days, of course, you didn't have all of the electronic and digital stuff, so you had to be able to take shorthand. Figured out real quickly I wasn't any good at that. So I changed my major and went into education, and I always enjoyed, at a small rural school, a lot of times the high school kids worked with the elementary kids, and I enjoyed that, and I thought, that might be a really kind of a cool gig to be a teacher and come back home and teach in the school I grew up in.
We're going to touch upon that in a second, but going back, you attended college at?
I began at Evangel University, or Evangel College at the time, in Springfield, Illinois, Springfield, Missouri. I had a scholarship to go there my first 2 years, and then my heart got broken because I thought sure I was going to be a minister's wife, and that didn't work out. Enjoyed the musical part, participated in a lot of cross-country choral, sang for the radio, for evangelical radio. But then I got my heart broken. I said, I'm going home. I don't need any more of this. And came back to Central State University, Central State College at the time, and finished up there. Because it's such a great teacher school, it was a natural then to move into elementary education. The senior year I worked the entire time I was in college, but the senior year I was appointed as a dormitory, what they call them, a dorm assistant, a DA. And I was responsible for freshman women on a floor. Found out very quickly I was not necessarily the role model type. We had to have girls in bed. Well, they had to be in study hall at 8 o'clock, so everybody had to be in at 8, which meant as a senior I had to as well. And then supervised study hall from 8 to 10, and at 10 lights out. I'll never forget my real waking up. Now, all my girls loved me, and I loved them, and I would do anything for them. We had great rapport. Met girls from all over the state. But the dean of women at the time and the dorm house mother took real exception to the fact that I would bend the rules to let the girls do things that probably weren't necessarily in their academic best interest. But I'll never forget one night the Miss America contest was on, and Miss Oklahoma was in the finals, and the girls were going, oh, let us finish watching this. And here it was, 8 o'clock and time for study hall. And I went, oh. And so we did. We watched it. And then we got busted. And I got called to the dean of women, and she said, young lady, you'll never amount to anything if you don't learn some self-discipline and how to discipline others. And I was just devastated. Dean Wilma Armstrong was a force to be reckoned with. But it did teach me a lot about, it's great to be a good guy, but it's also very important that you remember the rules are the rules are the rules. So that was a challenge. So I graduated from Central State College in 1970 and began my elementary school career.
And what was your first school?
Culbertson Elementary. In 1970, in the fall of 1970, Oklahoma was not integrated yet. Our Oklahoma City schools were not integrated yet. So this was an all-black school on Northeast 13th in the heart of what could be considered the black community. My first principal was Moses Miller, who had been an icon as a high school basketball coach at Douglas High School. And in those days, when coaches got ready to retire from coaching, they put them in elementary schools to be elementary principals because, of course, we know that it doesn't take an awful lot to teach little kids. And so I walked into the school, by the way, had never been around any other culture other than Native American, and only briefly associated with that. We had some students at Dale, had no black students at all. And so I walked into this all-black school and met Mr. Miller, who was a very imposing person who never got up from his desk when I walked in. He hired me sight unseen because they needed teachers badly, and it was a rough school in a rough neighborhood. It was also before we did promotional based on, for a long time you didn't promote kids if they couldn't pass. Then we went to that whole genre where it was a socialization and you promoted kids whether they were prepared or not. But this was in that era before there. And so I was taking 5th and 6th grade split class. But Mr. Miller reached down and opened the drawer on his desk, and he pulled out a rubber hose like you use in surgical tubing, and slammed it down on his desk, and he said, "Young lady, you're very small. I recommend you use this, and you use it well, or those boys will run over you." And I went with big eyes, oh my goodness, what have I gotten into? Because I had never struck another human being in my life. Couldn't imagine spanking children. Mr. Miller was quite correct in the fact that the big kids would try to run over me, and he was right about that. I had 5th and 6th graders that were 6 feet tall. Some big guys who had been retained were 13 and 14 years old. But I learned a huge lesson that year. Some of the faculty that were there were African American, and they took me under their wings to teach me the culture, to teach me how to survive. I had some really, really ornery students, and I had some really, really wonderful students that responded greatly to having someone who cared about what happened to them. One of my great stories to tell is red light, green light. I'd never heard of red light, green light, but it was where boys raced up and down the hall, and quite loud and quite vigorously. And of course, in those old buildings, everything echoed, and they'd scream red light, and everybody would stop, and then they'd holler. Now, this was during school. The kids would just walk out in the hall and start doing this activity, which was kind of strange to me because I was from Dale, where the only reason you got out in the hall was if you got a hall pass, and then you didn't dare do anything because your parents knew what you did before you ever got home that day. But I stepped out into the hall one day. They were doing this, and I was teaching something. I don't know what. And the kids kept looking up and looking out the door and looking out the door. And I had one of the young men run by, and he hollered an obscenity as he stopped by my door, and I walked out. Literally reached up and grabbed him by the lapels, slammed him against the wall, and I said, "Don't you ever use that language around me again or around my class." And it was like the pivotal point. Later I would learn that that's one of Sun Tzu's theory of war, which I'll talk about later. But it was to take on the biggest, baddest guy there and make him believe you're the boss. And I never had any trouble with any of the kids. I had other white teachers in the building whose car was their tires were slashed, they had sugar in their gas tanks, never had any problems with any of the kids. And so I literally moved into the neighborhood to enculturate myself, got to go for the first time to black nightclubs, black churches, and really get inside understanding what made my kids tick. And I really think that was a huge piece of the success story that I had. I was there for 2 years before I got married and moved out of state.
Well, it must have been very rewarding for you.
I loved it. I loved the kids. I loved the culture. I loved the neighborhood. Mr. Miller, who was an icon, as I later came to know, I didn't know who he was at the time, was an extremely gracious gentleman who had his ego a little bruised by being moved to an elementary school. I met some wonderful friends who are still friends today. Roy Joe Ben Thurston was our physical fitness teacher, our PE teacher, and a big hulky guy who had played semi-pro ball for the Oklahoma Plainsmen and had been a high school athlete at Douglas and played football in college. And he was married to the tiniest little thing you've ever met, Joy. No, Joy's their daughter. Anyway, she was the school teacher at Classen High School, one of the very few black high school teachers in an upper middle class white school in Oklahoma City. And Flossie Thurston, who went on to become vice president at Langston University. But they took me under their wing, gave me my first chance at eating chitlins and my last, taught me about pressing hair, and all of these different cultural type settings that I'd never been exposed to. And today we're still friends and we still see each other. But they were wonderful. I spent many nights sleeping on their couch, and with their darling daughter Joy, who is now a school teacher herself.
So you got married and you moved out of state. Where'd you go?
Went to Cheyenne, Wyoming. Wow, what a shock there. I married a young man who was a youth minister, and he was from Wyoming, and had come down to do graduate school at UCO, and I was working on my graduate degree at night at UCO, and kind of one of those fairy tale things. We both thought we were so old we were never going to get married. I think we were 24, and so we decided, this is the time, this is the place, and let's do it. So got married, moved to Cheyenne, Wyoming. Couldn't teach up there. There was no teaching jobs available, so I worked at the Blue Cross Blue Shield insurance company and answered the phone. We were there about a year, and we decided it was time to move back to Oklahoma. And so we did. We came back to Oklahoma, and I reapplied to teach in the Oklahoma City Public Schools.
And where did you end up?
At Van Buren. It's kind of scary because the first two schools I taught in were closed down, so that might tell us something. Van Buren was in South Oklahoma City, and again, this was after integration now had taken place. That was just at that pivotal point. And they did what they called open classroom teaching. And so all of the walls were taken out of the building. You had little risers, or usually bookshelves, that separated the classrooms, but you literally could see and hear all of the classes in the building at one time. Chaos, pure chaos. But it was a school strategy at the time, and we tried it, and it certainly kept people honest because you knew what they were doing. You could tell what everybody in the building was doing at all times. And I taught there for 3 years before I got a chance to go to the fifth year center, and I loved teaching fifth grade. I went to Longfellow, which with the integration program, all the kids from all over town were sent to fifth year centers, and so I had a multi-ethnic group that came through and taught again in an open classroom, but there were only 3 at a time, and so we teach with 3 classrooms that were open at a time, so you could hear what was really basically going on in the other 2 classrooms. I taught language and history, or I taught reading, language, and history. And then the next teacher would teach math and science, and the next one taught social studies and handwriting and that kind of thing. So we each had our specialty, almost like high school, and then we'd move the kids through. Had some great experiences there, great experiences. But that was where I decided that I wanted to become a principal. I worked for a guy named Buffy Brewer, who was a principal who was really good at delegating. I'll use that real carefully. And so a lot of times I got pulled in to help do administrative type things with parents and whatever, and built a lot of confidence with thinking, you know what, I think I might be able to run the school. I don't think it's all that tough. If Buffy can do it, I can do it. And he recommended me to begin the internship program for administration.
And how long was that process?
It took, about a year to apply for it, to get into it, and then the actual internship, you had to be selected by a principal to get to go do it, and that was 1 semester. So you spent a semester preparing for it with classes, besides the fact you had to already have your administrative certificate finished, and then which was 30 hours past your master's degree. So at that time I was a single mama with 2 little girls, trying to figure out how to get through finishing my administrative certificate, raising 2 little girls, and deciding to become a principal.
So where did the Air National Guard come into play?
Very good question. I guess while I was still at Van Buren, we had it was the year that Oklahoma City teachers decided to strike. Now, I was very poor. I was a single mom then. Very poor, couldn't figure out how in the world to feed my kids. My husband had been crushed in a motorcycle wreck. He was driving to work one morning, was run over by a mass trans bus. And so I was trying to figure out, I was working at McDonald's when school wasn't in session. I was a church secretary and teaching. And here we were getting ready to go on strike. And while I wasn't a member, all my friends were. I wasn't a union member because I frankly couldn't afford the dues. And they were going like, you can't cross the line. You just can't cross the line. You can't do that. And so I was talking to one of our elders at church, and he said, why don't you join the Air National Guard? We'll keep you working all the time that you're not in school, instead of working at McDonald's and church secretary and all that other stuff. It'll give you a great chance. And I thought, I'll get to be with adults, because I had 2 little babies at home, and then I go to school with little bitty kids that was second graders. That would be wonderful to have adult conversation. So when the teachers went on strike, they were wonderful. They pushed me through. I got to go to basic training while the strike was going on, so I didn't have to go on strike. I didn't have to cross the picket line, and I didn't have to lose my salary, so that was very good. And I did join the Air National Guard and went off to basic training, and the rest was history. I loved it. By the way, I joined as an airman basic with a master's degree. Master's degree in slick sleeve, no stripe, enlisted, and went through Air Force Basic. And while I thought this was my chance to go be with adults, I was the oldest member of the flight when we got there, and so I was put as the dorm chief over about 50 18-year-olds. So I really didn't get a break at all. They really weren't real adults, but it was a different set of pace in a very different environment. So again, it was one of those things that was fate. Got really lucky. In my whole career, I've always said I'd rather be lucky than good. I didn't have to take the hit that a lot of the teachers did with the strike. I got a chance to start an entirely additional career to what I was doing, and had been devastated at the loss of my husband. And so this was a real chance to reinvent myself, to find those qualities that gave me strength to figure out that I could do anything, because it was the first time I'd ever been away from my little girls. And I was gone for 6 weeks, so it was tough. That was the hardest thing I'd ever done in my life, and to date, it is the hardest thing I've ever done. Going off and leaving my babies with my mother, who was a saint. Had it not been for her, I'd have never survived. And yet I actually lived 40 miles from them, so it wasn't possible for them to help me on a daily basis. And by the way, both of them were still working full-time. But they took the girls, and I felt comfortable because my daughters adored their grandparents. So it worked out mentally okay for me. I survived all that. Came back home, went to training. Okay, you ready for this? As a draftsman for an engineering squadron. And so I, who could not even draw stick figures, I became a draftsman, and it was an interesting experience. And I was with all guys then. The engineering unit was all men, and I was sent to my little cubby hole to draw little circles and squares everywhere. It was very interesting. I spent a lot of time with the guys there, and I had several people who then took an interest in my career and were crucial in setting my pace for the future and helping me gain a commission. Colonel John Strickland was in civil engineering, and by the way, civil engineers used the draftsmen as well as the engineers did, the electrical engineers. And so they would between them find days for me to go work when I wasn't in school. So if it was on a fall break or Christmas break or spring break or summer, they kept me busy every day working. So it was very helpful to me financially, but more than that, they really started grooming me, telling me, that it was very important that anytime I was outside, I had my cover on. It was really important to set a standard of belief that you carried yourself with a little more dignity. And sooner or later, I had to apply 3 times, but I finally got accepted to an officer opportunity. And it was very interesting because there were not very many women in the Guard at that time. In fact, we were still limited to 2% by law, and that changed right after that. But I got an opportunity sort of backhanded. 3 of us had been selected for a second lieutenant's position in administration as an administrative officer. And back in those days, you didn't have to have a degree. You could go to officer training without a degree. Well, the 3 guys that I was the third choice. The first one had a baccalaureate degree in business, and this was going to be in administration, so that makes sense. It kind of went along with that. But had never been deployed, had never been away from home, and so he went merrily off to the 6 weeks of training for officer school, and after about the 3rd week, self-eliminated and came home because his wife was very upset that he was gone that long, and it was just too hard on her. So he self-eliminated, came back home, And we had to wait, of course, for another cycle. And then the second guy got it. This guy didn't have a college degree at all, but had been in the Guard a long time, was a great guy. But when he went to officer school, he couldn't pass it academically. And so he was eliminated and came home, and finally the commander said, well, we're down to third choice. I guess we'll send her. And so I went, and I came back as the honor graduate. And that kind of, I was sort of like, okay, in your face. I was your last choice, but I got to be first in the class. So it was a really, another encouragement to say you could do it. And of course, I worked for folks all over the base as an administrative officer, and got the opportunity to the wing commander gave me opportunities to do special days for him and train me in executive support and those kinds of things. The civil engineers were wonderful. I felt like that was my first home. Colonel Strickland, who became the commander then of civil engineering, later became the support group commander, and he was the person who literally recommended me for my first command. I'd worked as an administrative officer for the wing commander, so I learned everybody on base and learned the missions on base. So you had this big, broad spectrum view of what was going on. I didn't know at the time that it's usually the exec officer for the wing commander that ends up being having a really great career because of the broadening experience that you have. But I was a jack of all trades. I felt like I was a master of none. I worked in the mission support squadron. I worked in the mission support group. I was kind of moved around. I was the education officer, which made sense. I was a teacher. And then came the opportunity of a lifetime. For whatever reason, Colonel Strickland and Colonel Terry Raisin decided the base needed a woman commander. And there was a unit that probably didn't need an awful lot of oversight. So I might be all right there, you know. A bunch of tough old guys, real grizzled group, and that was called services. Now, services would be appropriate for a woman to command because it's food and housekeeping. You billet people, and you know. So I got sent to hotel restaurant management, which I may do as another career somewhere in my life. But the wartime tasking for that job was mortuary. And so not only did I get hotel restaurant management and food services types training, but I also went to a whole school. And this, to become commander of that organization, was a lot of schooling that I did at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And so I'd go for a 2-week course and come home, teach a while, go back for another 2-week course. And I think there were like 5 different courses that were involved in that. So I spent a lot of time up at Wright-Patterson. It also happened to be the time that the Gulf War kicked off. And the first Gulf War. And so being a mortuary officer, fully qualified, and services, we were called to backfill the Air Force. At that time, the Guard wasn't ever put in as frontline folks. We were sent to refill or backfill the Air Force. And so I was sent to Dover, Delaware. That's where the bodies were received that came in from the Gulf. The Gulf War was very short, very brief, and so we weren't on duty for a very long time. It was a very brief, I think, 12-day engagement. There were not a lot of bodies, but I did get to do my first autopsy, my first experience during the Gulf War. Came home, became a very successful commander. We learned a lot of very valuable lessons about, because food service touched everyone on base as well. Everyone came through to have lunch in the dining hall. By the way, I was real instrumental in changing the name from the mess hall, which is what the Army always called dining facilities, the mess hall, to the dining facility. We changed the way we served food. We changed the way we presented ourselves to the Air Guard, and our unit won Outstanding Unit in the Air Force 2 years in a row as commander. So that made the guys think maybe I did know something. Really what I knew was how to write, and I could write up the awards, so we did very, very well. From that came the opportunity then to go back to my original home, which was Mission Support Squadron, and become the first woman commander there, which made me automatically the first woman base commander, because the Mission Support Squadron was, the commander there was the commander of the base or the entire facility, because you owned the things from security forces or police, civil engineering, the food services, so I was now the second level manager over that. So it was a growth opportunity. Held that job for 2 or 3 years. Then they asked if I would go and be the logistics squadron commander. Now, when I say they ask you, they don't really ask you. They come and tell you, we're going to put you in this job. And I said, I don't know anything about logistics because that's supply, and it's a very involved and engaged. You have to understand all the rules and laws about acquiring things and distributing things across the base. And a lot of those people get in trouble because obviously it has to do with huge sums of money, like up to $90 million a year. But I decided, okay, I'll try it. I'll give it a shot, and if you think I can do it. So that meant going back to school again, going to supply officer school and logistics school. I felt like I was constantly going to school, never really getting the hang of all of the things that I was doing, because most of the guys that were there were in that unit for their entire career. They stayed with it the whole time. So I kept thinking, well, is this a real good deal, or am I such a screw-up they keep moving me to someplace else? But we always won awards where I was, and we always ended up doing a really good job and a great mission. Held that job for about 3 years, and then they gave me opportunity of a lifetime. And I say that with tongue-in-cheek. The wing commander had changed, and I thought, uh-oh, because I'd been the fair-haired child of the former wing commander. This wing commander was not necessarily a fan of the former wing commander, and he called me in. And I thought, okay, this is where I'm getting my head handed to me. I'm done. At that point, I didn't have quite 20 years in, and I was a little nervous. I thought, well, I need to have 20 years if I'm going to have any kind of afterlife. But instead, when I came in, he said, the aeromedical evacuation unit is in real trouble. They're getting ready to be the first guard lead unit in a joint training exercise. Now, this is when we first started jointness. And the guard was kind of behind the power curve. And here we were going to go to Fort Polk, Louisiana. We were going to be the lead medical unit for this huge exercise that brought in about 10,000 people. To say I was overwhelmed is putting it mildly, and I immediately said, well boss, I'm not a medical officer, and I'm not an aviator, because aeromedical evacuation meant we flew in, picked up, and you had to have very special training. You get wings, and you had to do you talk about a lot of schooling. And he said, I don't care, you know people, and we've got to get these people ready for this big event. And oh yeah, and as soon as you come home from that, we have this huge inspection that determines whether or not the unit even gets to stay alive. And I went, great, no pressure. But I was really lucky because there were a couple of folks in the unit who were former teachers, were great mentors, and even though I was senior to them in rank, they were very good about helping me learn how to do the things that need to be done. So I became qualified as an aeromedical evacuation mission support officer. And so, again, more training, more schooling, and I didn't have an awful lot of time to do this and get ready. But what I found out when I asked them for a briefing, I said, tell me what our short areas are. What is it we really need to work on? And they went, well, we've got 40 airmen that have never gotten promoted. That's huge. That's gigantic. And oh yeah, and by the way, the nurses don't have all their certifications to be able to go to this inspection. And we don't have any of our education and training records. They're all out of date. So I went back to the wing commander and said, okay, here's what I need. I need money for training. I need days so that I can bring these people in and get them ready. And we need to have an opportunity to really exercise and practice this. And he said, okay. I had just asked for the moon, and he not only handed me the moon, but he gave me a couple of stars as well. And so we did. We pulled these people in and got them trained in an intensive time. I promoted 40 airmen to staff sergeant overnight. It was wonderful because they finished their training. So morale was really high. Everybody was pumped. I got the nurses the specialized training they had to have, which they would have had to pay for on the outside. So it worked for their civilian job as well as what they were doing for the Guard. So they were happy. So it was one of those things you kind of win-win deal, and you're very excited. I got promoted to lieutenant colonel at that point, and we did go into the exercise, and we blew them away, and we ended up with an outstanding, which is the highest rating you can get in an inspection, and it helped pull the wing that was at a satisfactory up to an excellent. So I was the queen of the base for a day or two, and then they pulled me out of there and put me into another unit. I loved it. It's probably, to be truthful, I thought it was going to be the most, and it was the most difficult assignment I ever had, but it was also one of the most rewarding. I still stay in touch with a lot of my Aerovac folks around the country because this was a whole national exercise. They dropped 2,000 young soldiers out of airplanes at night, and we had to go recover them. So it was very interesting. And again, my first joint experience of working with Army. I like to take credit for a nationwide response. When we went in, I was going to be the last speaker to speak when we had this big joint exercise thing going. We had the Marines in there, and they oorah, and they go all through the whole thing, and then the Army came in and they hooah, and we didn't have very many Navy. But then I got up to represent the Air Force, and I'm going like, all I can tell you is that in the Air Force, we're a professional force, we da 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 da, and I would have to say that our whole take on the entire existence is cool, man. And from there on, all of the Air Force guys started going, cool, we're cool. It kind of fits the mentality of Air Force, which sees itself as the professional, executive, and easygoing force in the mix. And so we laugh a lot because a lot of times I'll hear people say, hey, Air Force, cool. Yeah. And I love that. That was a lot of fun. So then when we got back, I've now been a flight commander and 3 squadron officer commanders. And the wing commander called me in and he said, okay, I want you to come to work for me full time, and I want you to be the administrative officer for the support group. Now, there were no woman support group commanders because that was really an 06 or a colonel billet. But he said, now you'll have to get in line. I'm not promising you an 06, but it's a chance to make colonels somewhere down the road. I got to tell you though, there's 3 guys in front of you. And I thought, 3, that seems to be a prophetic number, doesn't it? Okay, all right, I'll do it. So I got called by the adjutant general immediately, and because he found out I'd been put into that slot, and he said, I need you full time. And I said, well, sir, I've only got 24 years in the school business. I can't really afford to leave because that's not much teaching time, for a retirement. And he came over and he bent over the table and he wrote down a number. He says, this is what an active duty colonel makes, and I'll promise you a colonel slot. Now, there hadn't been any women colonels, and when I looked at the number, it was double what I made as a principal. And I said, I can do that job. I can do that. And so I went to work for Steve Courtright, the Adjutant General of Oklahoma. Very exciting times. Talk about learning from a fire hose. He was a fighter pilot, which I'd always flown in the big plane into the world, and he had been a real 2-star. And a lot of times our adjutant generals grow up in the Guard, and so they've never had active duty time. But he had been the assistant to the commander of Pacific Air Forces. Sharp man, typical fighter pilot guy, tall, thin, looked like he was about 35. He's really about 58, 59, I guess. Sharp man. Never took no for an answer. You will find a way to do it, and you'll bring me 3 examples of the way you can do it, and 3 alternatives. Don't ever come and tell me that you have a problem unless you have a severe answer for it. And not having, I told you I don't do debate because I don't like, I pick a side, I go with it, I'm gutsy, this way. Now I'm not only going to have to tell you the pluses and minuses of everything, but I'm going to have to actually recommend one of those choices to you. During that time, the Murrah bombing happened, and it just so happened that I happened to be the only mortuary officer in the state at that time qualified. And that went back 2 jobs ago, but they called and asked if I would come down, and I did. I worked 18-hour days, would not go home, would not quit. I'd go home long enough to shower, change clothes, sleep for a couple hours, and go back to work. I was very driven. I was the only woman in the mortuary group, and so I was asked if I would do the identification and the notification of the children. The guys had a really hard time with that emotionally, and because I dealt with the little children for so long, I looked at it as an opportunity to do a service to their families because we were finally helping them find closure. So that was about 24 days straight, I think, that I did that. I was actually still principal at that time, so the school district released me and I went down to do that. And that's when I met General Courtright. That's the reason he came and said, I want you to come work for me full time. From there, I worked, I guess, 5 years for the Adjutant General, and spent a lot of time putting out fires, learning how to deal across state lines, working with the National Guard Bureau. And one day I walked in, because twice a year you submit names for general officers to the Guard Bureau for promotion. And I went into the Adjutant General and I said, here's your list of guys. In other words, all the colonels. You had to produce their dossiers, their backgrounds, and all this kind of stuff. And of course, I'd been a colonel now for 4 years myself. And he said, you're missing someone. And I said, no, sir, we've got them all there. They're all the people who are eligible. He said, where's yours? And I said, my what? And he said, your nomination packet. I quite literally was struck so dumb. Because I'd never even considered. I was just thrilled to death to have made colonel. So I went back to the personnel guy and I said, don't you tell anybody, don't you say anything. I said, well, we have to put together a package for me. And he started laughing. And it was a young man that I had mentored and brought up from enlisted to officer. And they they already had all the stuff working and ready. I was the only one who was clueless about it. And I was selected to be the Assistant Adjutant General for Air. And the rest was fun and storybook. I was selected, became the first woman general. It was very exciting, very heady. I was very full of myself, excited at the opportunity. However, it brought with it some sadness because it was just as we kicked off 9/11, had OIF and OEF, and for the first time in the state's history, I actually sent Oklahoma sons and daughters off to real combat. And it was a very tough job, very tough. But we didn't lose anybody. They were marvelous. The Tulsa unit fighters have been doing Southern Watch and Northern Watch for several years, so they had actually flown real combat missions. And now the airlift unit was deployed. The first units in, before there were even bases built, they landed on dirt and helped set up the very first flying units that were established in the desert. They airlifted people and things in to mount the assaults on Iraq. They didn't let me go. I didn't get to go at all. They didn't want general officers, particularly Guard general officers, messing up their work. But one picture that I'm very, very proud of is I stood on the flight line and saluted all of our guys leaving. And that picture was on the cover of all kinds of magazines. All you saw from the back was it was a woman standing saluting the planes as they departed. But they all came back home. It's something you take very seriously. When you talk about the men and women you serve with, and they're going off to face an uncertain future, and you just pray that you've trained them well, that you've given them all the supplies and the opportunities they need in order to be the greatest fighting force in the world, and they were. Oklahoma won all kinds of accolades and awards during their deployments. They carried more tonnage and more people than any other state's Air National Guard. And we had some great young soldiers who were security forces who won Bronze Stars and came back as real true heroes. So with the successful conclusion, obviously OIF and OEF are still going on 9.5 years later, so we didn't end all of the exercise or all of the fight, but it's still going on. But Oklahoma continues to serve even today, flying missions and flying people and things in and out. However, the unit was changed from an airlift unit now to an air refueling mission, and the 137th now refuels out of Tinker Air Force Base. Then I got a shot at my second star, which was unbelievable, and even for me, I'd kind of gotten used to doing things that other girls hadn't had a chance to do. But I was going to finally get to go back to my area. I was going to be an Air National Guard assistant to the commander of Air Education Training Command in San Antonio, Texas. Now, while I was the commander of the Oklahoma Air Guard, I was also part-time, or what they called a dual hat, and was an assistant to the Secretary of the Air Force for financial management. Also had no financial management background. Again, okay, so go try and learn what it means to do requirements, what trends and analysis are, and try to figure out how to get more money from the active duty Air Force into the Guard. And we did. We had a record budget year. So I really believe that that's what I ended up getting the second star for, was more than for being the commander of the Oklahoma Air Guard. Although when I ask what my favorite job was of all my life, I say being the commander of the Oklahoma Air National Guard. 2,500 of Oklahoma's sons and daughters that are the finest patriots in the world. So I'm excited. I'm going down to San Antonio. I've been in the Pentagon, and I've been here in Oklahoma. And I'm going to get to go to San Antonio and be on the River Walk, much relaxed. General Bill Looney, who is an Oklahoman, was the commander of Air Education Training Command. That's a 4-star, a real general, as they like to tell us. 1 stars and 2 stars and even 3 stars are brigadier general, major general, lieutenant general. But if you're a real general, you're a 4-star. And so I got to go work for the 4-star. And I remember walking into his office absolutely overwhelmed, standing at the position of attention and saying, "Sir, I'm very excited for the opportunity to serve with you." And I said, "However, I will have to tell you, I'm not real smart, but I work real hard." And he laughed and he said, "Well, you're an Okie. I would expect you to not be too smart." And we began a great, wonderful friendship and relationship. And he actually flew to Oklahoma to pin my second star on me at the Blue Room of the Capitol. And that's a huge honor. That doesn't happen very often. So I had the governor of the state of Oklahoma, Brad Henry, and 4-star general pinning on my 2 stars. And he told that story at my pinning. He said, "She said she wasn't very smart," and she was right. She's not, but she does work hard. And it was a really exciting day, and I got to address the legislature, and I got to spend time talking to the folks about this really unique opportunity for a hairy-legged girl from Dale, Oklahoma. Something never dreamed of, never thought of. But I do find that it's always about being prepared. Make sure you have everything done. It's like waiting till you're third at the shot, but if you've got everything done, you can step into it and know that you're ready to go do it. Training is crucial. For years, that's what the Guard did, was we trained to go to war, we trained to go to war, we trained to go to war. Whoops, here's the war. Are we ready? Are we trained? And the answer was yes, we were. While I was in San Antonio, my husband got to come down and spend some time with us, and it was a very relaxed environment after what I'd been in the Pentagon with. Pentagon worked 18-hour days working for the Secretary of the Air Force. Besides trying to learn what financial management meant, and traveling across the nation to spend time at different state headquarters for the different Air National Guards in order to talk to them about what their needs were and what we needed to help them do as far as money. Became good friends with the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Financial Management, John Vonglis, who is still today, Mr. Secretary is still a very good friend of mine. And I just was notified they finally ended their career time in Washington. He's retired and gone back to the state of New York, of which I gave him my apologies. I'm sorry. I said, "You should have moved to Oklahoma. I don't know what you were thinking of." But that's the great part of the experience of being in the big Air Forces, all of the wonderful people that you get to meet all across the nation, and certainly in Washington. So in San Antonio, we played a lot of golf. It was a very relaxed mode, a very rejuvenating mode. I got to fly T-38s and got sick a lot, but it was a lot of fun and very exciting to fly with, because it's a flight training unit, so got to do a lot of great stuff. And then I got a phone call after I was there about 18 months, and it was the director of the Air National Guard, Craig McKinley, who went on to become the chief of the Air National Guard, the 4-star. He was 3-star at the time. He said, "Reet, don't you know Roger Brady?" And I said, "Sure, General Brady is from Oklahoma. He graduated from Midwest City High School. We've been buddies for a long time." Of course, he was a star ahead of me. He said, "I need you to come back to Washington to work for him in Air Force personnel." And I said, "What? Back to the Pentagon?" He said, "We really need you to do that." He said, "Because we're having real trouble getting the kind of support that we need out of Air Force, and we need to make sure we've got people ready to integrate. And we got to make sure we get enough of the right kind of ranks and things to do that with. And I said, sir, I'm not a personnelist. I mean, I know I was a mission support group commander, and that handles personnel, but I'm not a personnelist. He said, that's all right, you're a people person. You'll find a way to make Roger love you. He loves you. We want him to love the Guard. But General Brady was notorious for not liking the Guard, and when he became the director of personnel for the Air Force, or the chief of staff, assistant deputy chief of staff at the Air Force for personnel management, the Guard found itself in pretty hard times. We had hard times getting promotions. We had hard times getting general officers through. We had a hard time looking at the right mix, because the Air Force was deciding to downsize so that we could afford to pay for new airplanes. We took it off of the backs of the airmen by cutting our numbers and cutting our ranks and cutting our structure in order to be able to provide new aircraft, new technology, because Air Force prides itself in being the technological branch of the military. So I said goodbye to General Looney and packed up and went back to the Pentagon. I had literally a closet as an office with a sliding door. It reminded me of my bathroom at home. I have a sliding door in my bathroom. Well, here we are, big time. But it was a great opportunity. General Brady did not love the Guard, but he did love me, and he allowed us to do some things that we've not been able to do. So it pleased the director of the Guard, and he said, you're doing what? But it was a part-time job. So the day came when General Brady got his 4th star. He was a 3-star at the time. He got his 4th star, and he was going to go be the commander of Air Forces Europe. And I said, don't you want me to come with you? Aren't you sure you would like me to come to Ramstein with you? And he said, no, I think not. So I tendered my resignation, because I was going to be 60, and General Brady was leaving, and I said, what else can I possibly do? I went into the director and asked to be allowed to retire. And he looked at me and he said, well, if anybody's earned it, it's you. But he said, I'd really, you could stay 2 more years as a 2-star. I said, I've done what I've done, and it's time to go home. I'm ready to go back to Oklahoma. So I did. I got to retire at the Women's Memorial, which I am very, very proud of. They have what they call the Hall of Honors, which is all of the state flags in the 4 territories. And on the flange of the Oklahoma flag, it says, Major General Rita Aragon, Commander of Oklahoma Air National Guard. We raised a lot of money at my retirement to be able to pay for that. Instead of doing a regular retirement, we did the retirement in Washington at the Women's Memorial, and General McKinley retired me. And then I came home, and we had a huge party at the Army Readiness Training Center here in Oklahoma, which housed about, I think they figured we had about 300 people who came. And I said, no presents, don't bring any of this plaques and stuff. I've got plenty of I Love Me stuff. But make a donation to the Women's Memorial. And so we raised about $18,000 to send to the Women's Memorial, a place that is very near and dear to my heart, because it's the first memorial ever dedicated to women in the nation. If you go to other countries, most of the militaries have entire monuments erected to the women who served in the military. In the United States, we had not. In D.C. on the Mall, we had one small memorial to nurses that they had raised the money for. Military nurses had raised the money for Vietnam nurses, and erected a statue. But this is an entirely beautiful museum and monument at the gates of Arlington Cemetery. The gates there had are great gray stone, and they had really fallen in disarray since being erected. And being women, as usual, we went in and fixed stuff. So we fixed, repaired the giant pillars that had huge eagles on top of them, and built this beautiful memorial to women who have served. It was very exciting. At the dedication, there were over 33,000 women, most of them World War II and Vietnam era women who had never had any recognition at all. And so the memorial is a living, breathing entity where it's very interactive. You go online and you can find the women who have served in the military and what their jobs were and what they did. And it really literally gave a voice to women in the military. And again, I have to thank General Courtright, Steve Courtright, because he allowed me to take 100 women, 50 Army and 50 Air, in a C-130 up to Washington, D.C., and we were the only women's group to march in the opening ceremonies of the memorial. It was very exciting. He led the organization. Our commander at the time, Jed Wright, who was a state senator, and Ronnie Turner, who was the commander of the Air Guard at the time, marched in front, led us 50 women, 100 women, into the Women's Memorial. It was a thrilling and exciting adventure, and on the big mural that they have of the day that it happened, you can see the Oklahoma Air Guard sitting right there, all of us together, Army and Air Guard. It was a very exciting opportunity. One of those things that in my memory bank will stand out forever because men recognized us.
And you retired in 2007?
I did. 2007, December 3rd, because that was my birthday. I turned 60 years old and retired.
Well, going back, was your family thrilled that you were going into the military?
Oh, no. Of course, my dad had always been I really kind of thought about wanting to do it out of high school and going on to ROTC and, getting my paid to college. Then I got the scholarship, and my dad who had worked at Tinker Air Force Base, was very familiar with the military, but he had a 4F, so he wasn't able to join the military during Korea and World War II in Korea. And so he never served in the military, but he'd served the country by working at Tinker. So no, they weren't real pumped on it. I had a chance to go to Harvard as a female general officer, and I was asked there by one of the Russian generals if my father had allowed me to join the military. And I said, well, no, I was already an adult. I was a mother of 2 children, and I decided to join myself. And he said, so your husband let you join the military? And I said, well, no, I was a single mom. I wasn't married. And he says, I had 2 daughters. I never let them join the military. I said, really? Are they retarded? What's wrong with them? And he didn't appreciate the humor of that, but later on he did. And the truth was that, no, my family wasn't real excited about it. But once I made general, my dad was real cool. He thought that was all right. Actually, they were very supportive since they were the ones who had to take care of my girls. I ended up remarrying in 1980, when did I get married? 1981, right after I'd become an officer. And my husband had 4 children, and I adopted his 4 kids. And of our 6 kids together, and my 2 girls and his daughter and 3 sons, we had 3 boys and 3 girls. My daughter went into the Air Force and made it to captain, and they put her through medical school, and she's a physician assistant. Our oldest son is a sergeant major, which is the highest enlisted rank in the Army, and still serves today. My daughter is out. She has a little girl that's 7 years old. And so 2 of the 6 followed into the military, but and they're all very patriotic kids. All of them are, they go like, we know, Mom, God and country, we got you. So it did change the way that they looked at it, and the way my parents looked at it, and they're very proud. They have my picture as an airman basic, and then as a general officer hanging on their wall at home. So
Side by side.
Side by side.
Before we get to your Harvard story, is it tough to be a woman in the military?
I always tell people it's a very different experience today. Today, women comprise about 20% of the military, both active duty and Guard and Reserve forces. So there are career fields that are open to women today that were not open when I joined in 1979. It was tough back then. I say it was tough. I got great opportunities and great doors were open. But when I joined, most of the women that were in the military were either nurses or they were administrative, secretarial types. There were very few other career fields that were open to women, but that's changed over the last 30 plus years. And today, the Air Force has every one of its career fields open to women. And I serve on a White House commission that is getting ready to recommend to Congress that we take the Women in Combat Exclusion Law out so that women who really are doing that today, by the way, they really are serving in ground combat in Iraq and Afghanistan. Because of the culture that's there, they must have women that go in with them to knock down doors and go into houses because the male soldiers can't have contact with women. So today, no, it's not tough. It's a different set of experiences and a different set of requirements and a different set of expectations than men have going into it, even today. There are a lot of things that you're going to have to deal with, a lot of physical differences that we have to make adjustments for. For instance, going on submarines. The Navy fought women going on submarines because they're very tiny spaces and they stay under water sometimes for several months at a time. And so you really do have to have kind of separate support facilities for women. But the Navy has done that now. And a good friend of mine was very instrumental in making that happen. Rear Admiral Sonny Masso was the Navy personnel director that said, we're going to do it. We'll step up. We're going to outfit the ships. So today there are no career fields in the Navy other than SEALs that are closed to women. And that's because that's direct combat, ground combat. Hopefully that'll be overturned soon. There are wonderful opportunities for women today. It's a great way to get an education. It's a great way to build a career. It's a great way to travel the world and see the world that women have never really had in past. So it's an exciting time to be in the military today.
In summing up your story and how you've been where you've been, I've noticed a couple themes. Obviously, hard work and mentoring. This constant theme
Absolutely.
of mentoring. Have you done a little bit of the same yourself? Mentoring?
Absolutely. Not just to women, but to men as well. Yeah. I talked about the young enlisted person that I trained as a personnel and took with me. He's a major waiting to make lieutenant colonel. Several of the young ladies in the Guard, but also Air Force wide. I have young men and women who will say, would you write a letter for me to get into this particular kind of training, or to just get into the Air Force, or just to travel here? Yeah, it is important. It's crucial. In something that is as technically expert as the Air Force likes to be, it's very crucial that you understand that an Air Force career is much more than a job. It is your whole lifestyle. You have to change environments frequently. You have to move from job to job, which in the world of business, we're doing it now, but that's a brand new experience in that. Only at executive levels do people really move from place to place. In the Air Force or in the military period, you change your entire family and your workforce very frequently. And it's really important to have people who will say, it's important to be ready for the next step. It's important that you have not only your professional military education and your civilian education under your belt, but here's some experiences you need to go have. I will never forget. I had a friend in civil engineering who really, quite literally, made fun of me. I did all of my professional military education. Of course, I already had a master's degree, then went on and got 30 hours past it, then started working on my doctorate. And I took on every volunteer opportunity there was on the base. And he laughed at me and he said, "Why are you killing yourself to do this?" And I said, "Because I have to work harder to get the same recognition that you get." And it ended up, he retired as a colonel and I retired as a 2-star general. So I think that is proof in itself. But it is absolutely crucial to have someone who'll say, you can do this. And what you have to do it. I always like to say I was lucky. I was in the right place at the right time. It was that time in history when things changed. It was that time in Oklahoma when we changed leadership. It was that time. But I also say that the harder I work, the luckier I get. And so hard work and luck and having people who will tell you, you can do this. And here's how you need. I'll never forget Captain, when I was enlisted, had been on active duty and he came into the Guard. And that was back in the day when the Guard was considered the boys' flying club. No one wore their cover on base. They just didn't wear hats. It wasn't a big deal. Who cares? We're the Guard, blah, blah, blah. But he'd come off of active duty. And he looked at me one day and he said, if you don't have the integrity to follow the rules, whether everybody else is following them or not, you'll never amount to anything. And he was honest about it. Never saw the man outside without his cover on. So I was never outside without my cover on. And years later, I had some of the old guys that I had really been educated by, some old enlisted guys, who said, you know, one of the things I admired about you most was you didn't care what everybody else was doing. You did what was right. And that's huge. That's huge. And I take that back to, all the way back to my parents, because that was a big thing, you know. My mother used to say, so if everybody jumps off the building, you're going to jump too? You know, make your own decisions. Be responsible for yourself. Have some integrity and some backbone to do what's right.
Did you ever think, in your wildest dreams going in, that you would attain the 2-star rank that you have?
Absolutely not. Like I said, there weren't even any colonels, women. I just thought if I make it to major, I'll be really happy. I can get 20 years in, be a major. That would be so cool. Because for the first 3 years, of course, I was enlisted. My big goal then was just to become an officer.
Right.
And be called ma'am and be saluted when you drove through the gate. An aside, we drove into Tinker yesterday afternoon, my daughter and my granddaughter and I were in the car. And my daughter, who was the captain, my granddaughter's not been around the military much because she got out right after Shelby was born. She said, Shelby, move on the other side of the car, put your seatbelt on, and watch when Grandma goes through the gate. The young lady rendered a really sharp salute. I'm in civilian clothes, but my ID said I was a general. And I mean, every one of us, all of them stopped, and they saluted, and Shelby went, wow. And I said, Shelby, you know what? That's pretty much the feeling I still get every time I get saluted. Wow. It's a very cool deal.
Wow. Well, tell me about Harvard. What happened?
Oh, I became this new 1-star general, and I'm very excited. Woo! And I go to what they call charm school. My husband and I were required to go to general officer training because the spouses of the generals, normally women, are taught how to entertain and how to dine with dignitaries, ambassadors, or whatever. And my husband, who is a very independent gentleman, said, I'll go with you, but I'm not having any tea parties. So we'd come back from charm school, and I get this phone call, and I'm perk up immediately because the guy comes rushing in. He says, General, you have a phone call. I was at the guard base. You have a call from Department of Defense. And I'm thinking, DOD, oh, I've already done something wrong. So I answer and say, yes, this is General Aragon. General Aragon, we need a female general officer that will not necessarily be incensed by the lack of political correctness of the Russian military. I said, darling, do you know where I'm from? I'm from Oklahoma. We grade political incorrectness. I said, what is it that you need? They said, well, we need someone to come to Harvard to speak to the Russian military security course, the Kennedy School of Government, about why women are important to our military. I said, okay. So I go to Harvard in January. I think this was 2004. And I'm very full of myself. They did say, though, this is academic environment, and it is, by the way, Harvard, which is very liberal. So you're not going to wear your uniform. No one wears uniforms. You'll wear just civilian attire. Well, at that point, I'd already been, in the Guard full-time active duty now for about 5 years. So my civilian wardrobe was a bit lacking. So it was real exciting. I got to go shopping, and I go to Harvard, and I fly into Boston, and feeling very, very full of myself. I have on a fur coat and my little high heel boots, and I walk into the hall where we're supposed to sign in, pulling my little suitcase behind me, and they fit you with a little earpiece. So because the only Russian I know I'd learned on Hunt for Red October with Sean Connery, I could say "Do svidaniya" and "da." That was about it. And supposedly the Russians didn't speak. Now there were 18 Americans and 20 Russians and me, all men. And the Americans were all admirals and generals, 1 and 2 stars. And the Russians were all the way from 1 star to 3 star, with the understanding that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of the Russian military would come to our final event. So we were all kind of excited, and I'm, again, intimidated, going, what are you doing here? You know you can't speak for the women of America. You sure can't speak for the women of the military. But I get there, and we're fitted. And I used to laugh and say, for the first time in my life, the voices in my head really were people talking to me. They were translating the Russian. And I hear this voice, this little man who's about my height and weighs about 300 pounds comes up, and he says, so, you're a woman, General? And And I said, yes, I am. I'm Rita Aragon from Oklahoma. It's a pleasure to meet you. He says, you're not the real general, you're a Hollywood general. And I said, well, thank you. Remember, I'm not supposed to take offense to political incorrectness. I said, well, thank you very much. That's very gracious of you. He says, no, no, no. I mean, you're not for real. You're just for show. And so began my experience at Harvard. And my whole thing was to teach them about what women in the military are doing today in the United States. And we talked about, first I had to overcome the gender whole thing. I talked to them about what their mothers did and their wives and their daughters and their children. That's when Yuri Kalashnikov was, by the way, the gentleman who said that. He was also the gentleman who told me that he had 2 daughters that he would never let in the military. General Kalashnikov's grandfather was the person who designed the Kalashnikov rifle. So General Kalashnikov had a very long military history, family history. I tell people the AK-47, as we call it today, is used by thugs all around the world to include the Russians. So it is one of those historic things. So everyone is real in awe of General Kalashnikov, who is a 3-star, by the way. While they told us not to wear our stars, we all knew who the 1, 2, and 3 stars were. There was no doubt in anybody's mind. But because I had to break down that gender, I did something that I did all the time, even with the Guard guys. Again, I volunteered for more things. I waited on and took care of and administered to the civilities of the experience. So with me, they told us to bring something to give to everybody. Well, I bought little candy bars, the little Hershey miniatures of all kinds. They're crispy, they're crunchy, they're everything. And I made my own wrapper, which, by the way, I stole the idea from the Capitol, because they used to sell little bags of chocolates that had wrappers on them with famous Oklahomans on them. So I had my staff help me, and we put a little silver star on it. It said, Brigadier General Rita Aragon, Commander, Oklahoma Air National Guard. And we literally took glue sticks and wrapped these candies. That tells you the old teacher part of me coming out. So every morning I would lay a chocolate at everybody's place setting, because we set it an amphitheater type setting with a desk in front of us and earpieces, and we could hear all the stuff going on. And it started a dialogue. You know, they liked the chocolate. The Americans liked the chocolate too. It was kind of a barrier breaker. All of a sudden they're talking to me about, they gave me some of their chocolate. It was nasty. It was like baker's chocolate with, bitter and blech, waxy. So it started the dialogue and talking about their wives, their children, their daughters, their mothers. Well, what do you, my mother's a very strong woman, blah, 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 blah. So why is it that doesn't translate to the military? Because, by the way, you're getting ready to go to an all-volunteer force, which is what we did in 1973. That's what really opened the door for women to start in different career fields. And when you go to an all-volunteer force, 51% of Russia is female. So over half of the people that you have to select from are going to be women. The key issue is training, leadership opportunities, and mentoring. If you do those things, you will find that there. By the way, it only takes a 1/4 pound of pressure to pull a trigger on an AK-47. And it only takes a 1/4 pound of pressure to pull the yoke back on an F-16 fighter. So it isn't about brute strength. It's about knowledge and about experience and about confidence and leadership. So every night we move tables, and we have these wonderful dinners there at Harvard. And the first night, of course, Harvard sponsored it, and we had lobster and crab and all the East Coast delicacies. And the next night the Navy hosted it, and the next night the Army hosted it, and the next night, So we go around all this. Of course, the night that Air Force hosted it, we had steak, manly food. It was very good. But the very last night we're there at Harvard, the Russians are going to host it. And so we walk in every night. We've had these beautiful, wonderful dinners at round tables, and everyone moves tables so that you get to small group talk to each other. This night we have one huge long table with a white tablecloth on it, and there's big baskets of hard bread and big trays of cheese and a big tray of pickled stuff. Pickled dill pickles, pickled cucumbers, pickled beets, pickled chicken something or another, pickled pig's feet. But everything was pickled because that's most of their diet. I'm thinking I'm going to have some borscht. This will be good. And I can make it on bread and cheese. But beside every place setting was a huge decanter of 180 proof vodka. Every place setting had their own bottle. And I'm going, uh-oh, because every night those guys drank a lot. I knew they did. And I understood in the culture that, drinking vodka is how they tear down their enemies. They absolutely get them blottoed. So every person, this was a military dining in, so every person would have a toast. And in a military dining in, you make a toast, you throw back the drink, and you turn the cup upside down on your head to prove you've emptied it. No cheating. So they told me I would have the fifth toast because they figured I'd be comatose after that with 180 proof vodka. And I thought, you have no idea. Yeah. So we start off and we fill our cup and we toast President Putin, and they go blah, 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 and we throw it back and set the cup on top of our head, and it was like liquid fire. And I thought, I literally couldn't get my breath. Immediately, charge your glass again. So we pour it in again to George W. Bush, President of the United States, greatest military mind on the face of the earth, blah, 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 and they just go on and on. And you throw it back and put it on top of your head, and I went, my knees buckled, literally. I'm going like, I'll never make it to 5. But we sit down then. And they said, now you start, your food. And I said, what am I going to do? My head is spinning. My throat's on fire. My stomach's on fire. And I think quick. And I had on a suit jacket. I reached over and I picked up my bottle and I stuck it under my jacket. I said, gentlemen, if you'll excuse me, I need to go to the ladies' room. So I stand up and I go in and I pour out the vodka and I fill it up with water. I threw up the first 2 I'd already drank because my stomach was on fire. Stick it back under my jacket, and I go back in. Everyone stands. Thank you very much. We all sit down, and I put the bottle back out on the table. At that point, General Kalashnikov comes over, and he says, Little General, do not hurt yourself. Now I'm no longer Hollywood General. I'm just Little General. Little General, do not hurt yourself. Russian vodka is made for men. You will hurt yourself severely. And I said, thank you, Yuri. That's so kind of you. I said, I'll do my very best. I said, in Oklahoma, we drink a lot of vodka. It's kind of like our state drink. And I'm going, oh. So we continue toasting. And we continue toasting. And we get to my toast. And I stand up on the chair because obviously I'm the shortest in the room and I want to be heard. And so I toast to those men who on silver wings defy Earth's gravity to fly into the face of God and rain terror down upon the enemies of the United States of America. Bros. Everybody, they love it when you talk about death and dying. That's a big thing. So I'm a hit with my toast. And I sit down. And we continue toasting and eating and toasting and eating. And I have to admit, I wasn't eating an awful lot. I was eating some bread. And one by one, the Americans start literally falling out of their chairs across the room. And we get to the end of the evening, and I'm still toasting with the Russians. And, of course, I'm acting a little tipsy. But Kalashnikov comes over with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the 4-star. And they look at me and they say, you are a real general. And I said, well, yes, I am. And everyone laughs when I talk about that because I said it demonstrates exactly what I'm talking about. You don't have to be the toughest and you don't have to drink the most vodka, but you do have to be smart and you have to figure out what your enemy is expecting and you have to counter and do that. And when I talk to young people today, because I get a chance to go down to Maxwell Air Force Base and talk to them about leadership and about command and about what you have to do, and I keep saying, the most important skill you have, the most important item you have, is your brain. And if you're smart enough to figure out what the enemy is expecting, and you counter that, whether we're talking about terrorists or whether we're talking about frontal assault, I went to war college, I understand all the movement strategies and the tactics, but the truth is, when you fall back to your own ingenuity and your own brain power, and you've studied your enemy and you know what they are looking at, that's the way we overcome. And that's what the United States has been good at for the last 300 years, is when we get pushed against the corner, we figure out what has to be done, and we do it, whatever it takes. If it means getting Sputnik beat to the moon, or whether we're talking about having the first supersonic aircraft, or whether we're talking about having the best surveillance system by satellite in the world. America does that. That's what's great about this great nation, is the people who will not stop, who use their creativity, their ingenuity, and their talents to defend this nation. And I left Harvard as a hero, yay, and was then asked to go to Russia to speak to them. which I never got to do. And I'm very glad because I don't think I could have hidden enough bottles there.
I don't think so. But it would have been fun to try.
It would have been fun. I would love to go to Russia. I really would. I would enjoy that very much.
Can you tell me about any, any stumbling blocks or adversity you faced along the way?
Oh, there were a lot of them. What I tried to do is not look at events as stumbling blocks, because I will tell you, every time I was given a different job, I thought that was going to be it. Thought that was going to be the time. The hardest thing to overcome, when I was the commander of the Oklahoma Air Guard, I had people say, so is it hard to be a woman and command all these guys? And I say, no, it was hard not being an aviator and commanding aviators, because aviators are what run the Air Force, and therefore they think differently, they act differently. They wear a different uniform. They wear that nice green bag that everyone identifies with. But having been in air medical evacuation, I was authorized to wear a bag. And so my first meeting with the fighter unit, the F-16 guys, who, by the way, are the guys who really do run the Air Force, the pointy plane guys, we call them. I put on my flight suit. I went up to them and assumed fighter pilot stance, which is hands on your hips, your feet spread apart, and looking at them. And I said, all right, gentlemen, do you want me to tell you how to fly those damn lawn darts out there? Or do you want me to let you do that, and I'll take care of the people and the money? And they all went. It never occurred to them that a non-aviator would tell them how to fly their airplanes. And obviously I wasn't about to, because I wasn't a fighter pilot. I wasn't a C-130 pilot. I was not an aviator. I was a rated person only because I was a commander of a flying unit. So the first thing I had to clear out of the air right away was, okay, I could do this because I have the rank to do it. But as long as you don't put one of those in the ground, as long as you fly and you don't get mishaps, as long as you take care of the people with you, I'll stay out of your flying business. And I'll take care of making sure you have the money and the people to do what you have to do to conduct a war. But make no mistake about it. You start yanking around and you start doing things that are stupid and you get safety violations, I'll be right in the middle of you. And by the way, I've fired a lot of people. I talked about Sun Tzu's theory of war. He has several theories on warfare and fighting. But the number one is, kill one, you impress 1,000. So my job was always, every unit I went to, everyone knew there was going to be one person who was singled out and taken down. And it was whoever was the biggest screw-up in the organization. Didn't matter whether they were enlisted, didn't matter whether they were officer. But I would come at you. My job was always, I will turn you around if you're willing to turn around. I will rehabilitate you if you're willing to be rehabilitated. But make no mistake about it. My job is to make sure this unit is the finest of its kind anywhere in this nation, and I will do that. I have a tradition of doing it. I have the reputation for doing it, and I will do it. And so usually by the third or fourth unit I got to, everybody's going, who's she after? Who's she coming to get? What's happening? And the truth was, that put me in good stead, because then I didn't have to do those things. The reputation took care of itself. Stumbling blocks to women are they're very hesitant to step up, to make the hard calls. It's hard to take someone's livelihood away from them, to fire them. That's not an easy thing to do. But sometimes it's what has to be done. If people won't rehabilitate, if they won't change their behaviors, if they don't do it. And that's the reason I never got in trouble with the union when I was a principal. Because I'd always say, here's what you've got to do to meet the standard that you have to have. And in teaching, it was always children first. In the military, it was always mission first. And if you can't put that first, if you can't take care of the mission, you really don't have a seat at this table. And if you don't have a seat at the table, I need to bring in someone else who can. So while you spend your time mentoring and training and educating, you also have to be tough enough to say, you're not making it, and be able to make the hard call. And that is not easy. I don't care whether you're a man or a woman, that's not an easy call.
Some career highlights.
Okay. Well, obviously Harvard was one. Being the first woman commander was one. Being the first woman general was one. Having the opportunity to serve in the Pentagon was very exciting for a small town girl. I think that there was something at every stage of my career that I would consider a highlight. But when I talk to people, or I talk to classes, or I talk to civic organizations, I always tell them the highlight of anyone's career, the pinnacle, is being able to say that people trust you to make decisions. They trust you to be the leader. Because even in the military where rank is the lead, you still have the informal leaders, those people that you look to get you through a rough spot. And I think the highest accolades I ever had were from the young men and women who would call me at first Colonel Mom, because they trusted me with their entire existence, and then later General Mom. And I still have young men and women today, and some of them not so young, who will come up to me and say, this is my foster mom, this is my general mom. And they won't call me by my given name. Some of them are assistant attorney generals of the state, some of them are surgeons, some of them are dentists, some of them are nurses, some of them are enlisted members who have served our nation very honorably. But for them to feel that they could call me mom is probably the highest accolade I could ever have. They trusted me for their life. They trusted me to take care of them and to take care of their career. I think that's the highest praise anyone can be given. Particularly if you're a mother, you understand that.
Well, in 2009, you were inducted into the Oklahoma Women's Hall of Fame. What was that like for you?
It's sort of surreal. I'm thinking, here are all these great women who have changed the course of history, who have had remarkable roles in Oklahoma, and here's a hairy-legged girl from Dale who got to do a whole bunch of really fun stuff, got to fly in airplanes and got to travel all around the world, every continent except Antarctica, and I have no desire to go there. It was really unreal, and particularly to be nominated by my a good friend and at that point Congresswoman Mary Fallon. It was a great, huge honor to get to go and to be with the other women that were there. In my class were some outstanding women. Mrs. Henry, the Supreme Court Justice's wife, who had also been extremely involved in women in incarceration, who later, Suzanne Edmondson, we became very good friends and worked on incarceration of women issues. So it was an exciting time. My family was all there. My children, all of the grandchildren that we could get there came, and to them, the grandkids, they really didn't understand it, but my parents did, and it was very gratifying to see the pride in their faces.
Well, what does Oklahoma mean to you?
Oklahoma, I often laugh when I'm traveling around the world and people will say, you always say, hi, I'm Rita Aragon from Oklahoma. Most people in the military never talk about where they're from. And I'd say, that's because that red dirt clings to you. And to think that you represent that somewhere across the world is so exciting. Oklahoma is my home. It's my family. My great-grandfather came in the land run. We've been here ever since. My children were born in Oklahoma. Most of my grandchildren have been born in Oklahoma. There is something about this state. We don't have an awful lot of great resources, but we have wonderful people. We have more great military leaders than any other state per capita. We have more astronauts than any other state per capita. We produce more entertainers, brilliant artists. It's the people that make Oklahoma. And I'm very proud to be one of them.
Well, you're getting ready to take on a new role.
I am.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I will be serving on the governor's cabinet, serving Oklahoma's heroes as the Secretary of Veterans Affairs, and I'm very excited to continue looking after those who have protected our freedoms throughout my lifetime and before, and will continue to do that. It's an exciting opportunity to be the first woman to get to do that job and to have a chance to interact with the legislature, a lot of the veterans groups around the state, and to try to work with the federal government to bring better care to Oklahoma's heroes here at home.
Well, if you could give, as we're winding down the interview, advice to fellow Oklahomans, do you have that one nugget that you would tell them?
I think the Army says it very well. Be all you can be. Don't limit yourself. Every human being has greater capacity than we've ever known. Einstein had brain damage. He had tumors in his brain, and yet he's one of the finest minds we've ever known. Why? Because he tapped his potential. And I would say that Oklahomans are such giving people. Oklahomans have great talent and resources, and I always say it's that red dirt. It makes you think about reaching out and reaching up. And I'd say be all you can be. Don't be afraid to try. I have a lot of people who say, well, how did you get to do that? And I'll say, because I wasn't afraid to fail. Don't be afraid to take that next step. My sister asked me one time, she said, well, how come you got to be this or that? And I said, I was lucky, I was in the right place, and I wasn't afraid to fail. So if I fall on my face, there hadn't been a woman do it yet, so what happens? Okay, I'm just one more. But the truth is, we all have enormous capabilities that we haven't even begun to tap, and the future will bear that out. So I would say to all Oklahomans, be all you can be. You have it within you. Reach deep and do it.
I have one more question, but before I ask it, is there anything else you'd like to add before we end today?
I don't think so. I'm just very lucky that I had a mother and dad who were very supportive of education. I had a wonderful husband who was extremely tolerant of my being gone a lot. He passed away this past March. He was my rock, and he was the backbone of our family. So I'm very, very grateful. And I'm very grateful to the men who took the time to let my hairy-legged girl learn a lot of stuff. Colonel John Strickland, Colonel Terry Raisin, General Steve Courtright, General Ed Stevens, guys who let me play and who gave me a chance to try. I also owe an enormous amount to some of my former coaches who still follow me today. Harold Jones at Dale still sends me an atta-girl when I do something new and good. Friends that I had through the military, those are the things that help us have the courage that once there's a stumbling block there, we say, you know what, get up and go over it. Friends, mentors, leaders, and Oklahoma's blessed with a lot of really great people. So those would be the things that I am most grateful for. And the only thing that I can say is nobody does it by themselves. Nobody does it. I had a great support system all along the way. And hopefully I've been helping to build that safety net for other people.
Well, when history is written about you, what would you like for it to say?
Wow. I hadn't thought about that. She wasn't afraid to try. She gave it her best shot. And she believed that everybody can do what they're meant to do. And that she was a doggone lucky, hairy-legged girl from Dale.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today. We really appreciate.
Thank you. And I am deeply honored by the fact that you would take this much time to talk to me. And I know that I've left out accolades that I should have given to an awful lot of people, but I'm excited to be a part of Oklahoma's history. To me, the highest praise I could ever get is that I'm in some history books, and if that old lady could do it, surely I can do it. And I hope that is it. I hope they believe that they can do whatever they want and dream as high as the sky.
Well, I think that's a great way to end our interview.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.